I'm Sergei Guriev. I'm Professor of Economics and Dean at London Business School, and it's my great honor and pleasure to welcome Philippe Aghion, my dear friend and actually co-author, to London Business School. Philippe, thank you so much for accepting to speak to us today. Philippe, of course, as you know, is a Nobel Prize winner from 2025. He's had a distinguished career in academia on both sides of the Atlantic. He was a graduate of École Normale Supérieure, which is the cream of French Grande École education. Then he did a PhD at Harvard. Then he started as an assistant professor at MIT. Then he came back to this side of the Atlantic, working in Oxford and UCL. He also worked at EBRD, European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, as a deputy chief economist. And in that role, he actually set up EBRD on an intellectual trajectory, which continues to this day, when academics serve as chief economists and think about how new ideas push the EBRD agenda forward. Then he went back to Harvard and served as a professor between 2002 and 2015, chaired Robert Wagner Professor of Economics. In 2015, he resigned from Harvard and came back to France to take over the chair in Collège de France. Now, people who don't speak French don't understand how important this job is in France. Essentially, in every discipline, Collège de France has one or two chairs. At that point, Philippe succeeded a very distinguished French economist, Sergei Guriev, who at that point stepped down. Unfortunately, he passed away very recently. Roger retired, and no one better than Philippe could actually take this super prestigious position, pretty much of the top French economist based in France. Philippe's also joined LSE as a visiting professor, in INSEAD as a Berkland Professor of Innovation. And of course, Philippe is known for his wide and broad research agenda. Now, people who've read tens of papers published by Philippe on all kinds of issues, in my field on contract theory, on structure of innovation, on microeconomics, and sometimes even on macroeconomics. We'll talk about that today. But of course, Philippe is best known for this one huge, powerful idea of neo-Schumpeterian growth, innovation, and creative destruction, which he has worked on with Peter Howitt for more than 30 years now. This is a simple but very powerful idea that explains a lot. And if you want a brief discussion of this research agenda, I welcome you to read this book by Ufuk Achijit and John Van Renen, which is only 750 pages long. So this is the book which a global community of economists came together, invited by Philippe in 2021, to celebrate 30 years of creative destruction, economics of creative destruction. This book is just called Economics of Creative Destruction, and talks about all the aspects of this powerful theory, which explains how we innovate, how we imitate technology, how we create new jobs, how we invest. Among other things, I should say, this book also explains how countries get into middle-income trap and escape middle-income trap, which gives me an immense pleasure because we worked with Philippe on a middle-income trap project with the EBRD and wrote a paper about how South Korea actually escaped middle-income trap after the crisis in the late 1990s. Now, one thing I would like to say about Philippe just gave an interview to Le Monde, which ends in a discussion about the dangers of being Nobel Prize winners. So I'm not sure we should all worry about this, but Philippe apparently was worried about three things which happen to Nobel Prize winners, who start talking about things they don't know about, start saying the same thing over and over again, and start speaking nonsense. So Philippe also tells us how to avoid this, how to escape the Nobelite trap, which is to continue to do research. And Philippe has been doing research on a broad set of issues, and one of the things that Philippe has recently done, very important work, is green innovation, how we use innovation for green growth. And this is a very nuanced set of policy recommendations. But overall, of course, Philippe's agenda remains what used to be on the screen, which is public policy for innovation, which instruments we should use for innovation, for driving our societies forward. And no one better than Philippe could open this series by Wheeler Institute for Business and Development, London Business School, whose motto is improving lives through business. So we'll have a series of talks on public policy for innovation. And today, Philippe will open this series. And Paolo Surico, professor of economics, who himself has worked on innovation and R&D, will chair this fireside chat. Thank you so much, Philippe. Welcome to London Business School.
Philippe, thank you very much. We are very happy to have you here. And I'm going to count on the promise you made in the Le Monde article. So we are going to stick to your field and to your ideas. I count on you for the nonsense. I will not be able to go on that. But let me add one restriction that you didn't put in the Le Monde, but I think is very important. Now that the entire world is looking at you with the Nobel Prize, you also have to try to be simple, to explain a complex idea, powerful mechanism in a way that also my parents would understand, or that any broader audience would do. So today, I'm going to ask you to start this conversation in the most possible gentle way. You know, we have thought about economic growth for almost the history of time, and thinking of capital accumulation and investing in infrastructure and R&D as a powerful mechanism for growth. But then you arrive and you said, oh, we're missing something important, the power of ideas. Could you tell us a little bit more how this big idea of ideas as engine for growth work?
Yeah. So you're right. I mean, when I was a student, the leading growth paradigm was the neoclassical growth paradigm, the Solo model, which was a very elegant model that tells you that you produce output, consumption goods with capital stock. Part of what you produce, you save to invest in increasing the capital stock, which allows you to increase production. But Solo himself would acknowledge that there are what we call decreasing returns to capital accumulation. That means you exhaust, you know, once you have accumulated lots of capital good, you know, the added production from one more unit is getting smaller and smaller, and eventually you can't grow in the long run. Growth tapers off if it's just based on capital accumulation. So you need something else than capital accumulation to sustain long-run growth. And that thing, Solo would refer to it as technical progress, but he would not tell you where technical progress comes from. It would be the Solo residual, the part that you cannot explain, and that's what I wanted to better understand. And and you know, there was this guy, you know, you would come across the name of Joseph Schumpeter and creative destruction. But at the time when I was in my students' days, that was a mondanité, quoi. It was something you would hear about, you know, in a course on history of economic thought. I came across with Dick Caves, you know, our friend Caves, you know, in IO class, and he would even mention Schumpeter. It looks really exciting. But I asked, where is the model? There was no model. Where's the empirics? There was no empirics. So then with Peter Howitt, you know, whom I met when I started at MIT in '87, and Peter was visiting for a year at MIT. He was my neighbor, and we used to talk to each other. And I came to his office once and said, look, you know, why don't we try from scratch to write a model that would encompass creative destruction? So we wrote that model. And the model would rest on three main ideas. The first idea is that long-run growth stems from cumulative innovation. Each innovator stands on giant shoulders of previous innovators. Second idea, innovations do not come from heaven. They are generated by entrepreneurs who seek monopoly rents by innovating. You find a new way of producing, a new product, a cheaper way to produce. For a while, you get monopoly rents until you are being superseded by subsequent innovators. And the third idea is creative destruction. New innovations displace old technologies. New innovations make old technologies obsolete. And at the heart of this paradigm, there is a contradiction. On the one hand, you need the innovation rents to motivate innovation, R&D investment and the like. But on the other hand, yesterday's innovators are tempted to use their rents to prevent subsequent innovation because they don't want themselves to be subject to creative destruction. And regulating a market economy is all about this contradiction. And whether you talk about, you know, secular stagnation, middle income trap, whatever, you come across constantly that, you know, this contradiction. And that was, I thought, was exciting. And it's about firms. I mean, the view is that at the heart of the growth process, you have firms, you have innovators, new talents come in, they create firms. By innovating, they grow firms. Once they've grown, of course, they're very tempted to use their rents and their position to prevent subsequent innovators. And so the whole thing is at the same time to make them, to allow firms to grow if they are good innovators and prosper, property right protection, financial ecosystem. And at the same time, you want to make sure that once they are become big incumbents, they don't, stall new entry and new innovation. And that's where competition policy in particular is important. But of course, competition policy is implemented by governments, and governments can be captured by incumbents. So how you'd solve that problem? And we got into this paradigm, and that, and I think it has grown. In fact, now many, young, talented researchers who have developed this paradigm. It's all about firm dynamics, heterogeneity, and it has grown, and that's what, that's exciting. So that are young people, because in fact, what apply, it's all about the discipline itself is about new talents coming in, and I always say that the day I become obsolete, it will validate my theory. So that's why I chose creative destruction.
So this was a wonderful start. As energetic, I could expect nothing less from Philippe Aghion. But what I want is, you alluded to this contradiction between innovation and competition. But what I wanted to ask you, if I think of the evidence out there, mostly from the US, now there is something more, for example, in France, you have done a lot on that. There seems to be a role for government, especially on mission-oriented. Many people nowadays talk about defense, to try to shape those policies.
Yeah.
So my question for you is, how do you see historically or how the government fits in this picture? Try to stimulate innovation?
There are two ways for government. I don't believe, for example, in trickle down. I don't believe that you make rich people richer and that's it, and then you stop, and then and just law and order and that's it. I don't believe in it. So if you look at the Schumpeterian paradigm, you need new talents. Where do they come from? They come from schooling. So, for example, we know now that children with richer parents, they're much more likely to become inventors. The work of Xavier Jaravel on the lost Einsteins and co-authors, and we know that. And we know that if you have a good education reform, like in Finland, you reduce the number of lost Einsteins. You have many smart kids from, poor backgrounds. They don't get the knowledge and aspiration from their parents. You see, that's where schooling is so important. So if you do a reform like a good schooling system with good PISA tests, where most people, really, they can come out of schooling having learned how to learn, you see, and having basic knowledge, reading, writing, calculus, and broad-based and good PISA tests, then you have, even children from poor backgrounds can become inventors. So already you have a pool, but that's a horizontal policy. Education is a horizontal policy. Another horizontal policy is competition. I told you the importance of having competition policy. Otherwise, large incumbents will prevent newcomers. That's also horizontal policy. It's across the board. So another horizontal policy that I believe in for creative destruction to both work well and protect individuals is flex security. I'm a big fan of the Danish model. In Denmark, when you lose your job, for 2 years, you get up to a certain level of salary, 90% of your salary. The state retrains you and helps you find a new job. Particularly with AI, I believe more than ever we will need a flex security system. And there's been work by our colleague Alexandra Roulet, Alexandra, and she showed that even though, whereas in the US you had a big rise in the mortality rate of unskilled middle age, in Denmark there is nothing of the sort. When you lose your job in Denmark, it has no negative effect on your health. And the flex security make creative destruction work much better. It makes Denmark more innovative, but also much more protective, because there is absolutely no negative effect on health of losing your job. So I believe all those are horizontal policies. They are policies across the board. I believe they are very important. But on top of that, I believe that another horizontal policy is research. I think it's very important. You don't become innovative if you don't allow for long-term research funding. Failure is important. You need to be able to fail. If you're not able to fail, you can't be disruptive. So long-term research funding is very important. In France, very few things work well in France. One thing that works well is the LABEX, the Laboratoire d'Excellence. Sarkozy, he did many bad things and he may end up in jail again. But one thing for which you know, the prison de la santé now is the most mundane spot in Paris. You know, you want to be in a mundane spot, you go to jail. But no way, bad joke. So Sarkozy did one good thing, is that he created a laboratoire d'excellence, you see. They had an international jury selecting LabEx projects, and those were 10-year funding. And that, you know, and our friend Antonin Bergeot from HEC and colleagues of his, they showed that wherever you have a LabEx, it boosted breakthrough innovation in industries that are technologically and geographically close to the LabEx. So that really worked well. So we should have many more LabEx at the European level. For example, I advocate not only in the UK or in France, but at the European level, I would like ERC to be expanded and to have ERC for labs, for example. That I think would be very good. All those are horizontal policies.
Exactly. Philippe,
then I get to the vertical.
Exactly. I wanted to challenge that. I go to the vertical.
But I wanted first to, you know, emphasize the fact there is enormous amount of government, you know, role into horizontal policy, okay? That I name a few. Or vertical, there are some areas indeed where you have missions to fulfill, like you had in the US in the 1950s. In the 1950s, the Soviet Union puts Gagarin in space. So the Americans felt very stupid. They say, we should have a man or woman in space, you know. And so they created DARPA. And DARPA, the idea, we said we have a mission. We achieved to put, we have 2 years, within 2 years we need a man in space or a woman in space or achieve that mission. The basic research is done, but you have a problem of S-curve, and you can't make the transition from basic research to implementation because you need to coordinate funding and resources and agents. So they created the DARPA, and the very smart thing with the DARPA is that it's both top-down and bottom-up. Top-down is that money comes from the defense ministry. They name team leaders for a 3 to 5 year period. But then there comes the bottom-up part of it. The team leaders have all latitude to elicit competing projects from downstream. And so it mixes up top-down and bottom-up. And what's very good is that it's a competition-friendly way to do industrial policy. And so they did it first in defense and space. That's how the internet, the GPS, autonomous navigation are corollaries of the DARPA. They came out without DARPA. Maybe they would never have, come to being. You see, never seen the day. And then they created the ARPA energy, ARPA infrastructure, and the BARDA. We are all here. I know there was AstraZeneca, but most of us are here thanks to RNA messenger vaccines. And it was exactly the same. The technology had been invented in Europe, Pfizer and whatever. But then the BARDA was the equivalent of DARPA for biotech. The mission was to get us out of, of COVID within a year or two. And so the same thing, they elicited competing labs to mass produce the vaccine, and exactly the same principle. So I think the DARPA model is very interesting. And in Europe, we don't have anything approaching the DARPA. The European Innovation Council is not a DARPA. So we remain in mid-tech incremental. It's managed by bureaucrats, and whereas DARPA is managed by, scientists, people from industry. So and there is a whole report from Bocconi and Toulouse showing we don't have anything remotely close to the DARPA in Europe. That's one of the big challenges. So that's where the vertical policy lies. We need to have the equivalent of DARPA, defense and space, and I would include AI. I would do another one for energy. We have, maybe one for biotech in the UK, and I would include the UK. That's a good way for UK to come back to us, because of course we want the UK back in Europe completely. So DARPA can be a good way to get you back, guys. Yeah.
So Philippe, before coming to this side of the Atlantic,
yes.
Let's say on the other side of the pond for a second more. Yes. And I want you to reflect. I mean, all the policy that you just described really are the innovation policy of the US government during World War II and then the Cold War. How do you see a difference relative to what the industrial policy?
Question 3, exactly. So I know we had a joke on this before. Exactly.
And climate change or
yes, exactly.
Strategic technology. Do you think change the approach?
So I had an idea for the answer, and then I look at ChatGPT, and it was in line with what I thought. You would think maybe that the way that I watch first ChatGPT and say I agree with ChatGPT, whatever. But
Philippe, are you sure we're not distracting your creativity?
No, exactly. You're testing. No, I will tell you. It's true that in the 50s, it was very much DARPA-driven. In fact, prior to the mid-50s or late 50s, it was you didn't have DARPA. It was peak winners, quoi. The head of World Bank, what was the name? I forgot the name. It was a kind of old-fashioned industrial policy. Initially, you pick winners. Then DARPA is an improvement because at least you have the bottom-up part that I'm talking about. And then what happened is that increasingly, but the DARPA still had, missions well-defined. And so there's been interesting work by John Van Reenen, and showing that, for example, there is the Small Business Innovation Research, the SBIR program at the US Air Force. And they introduced something called New Open Topics Program, which allows firms, so that means that it's open. We don't pre-specify in detail what we want.
So you try to attract a new entrant.
So you attract new firms with new ideas, and you select them, but you don't. You are much less, directive. You are much less, micromanagement on what you want. And what's very interesting is that it attracted a lot of new entrants with VC funding with it. And so the novelty is that VC, they open up the programs, some of the programs, and that attracted VC funding complementary to the government funding. And so there is much more VC funding nowadays than there used to be. And also, there is a lot of research in high-tech firms, which is privately done in high-tech firms. So whereas before, it was much more government program, and with very much, even though you had the bottom-up part, the missions were top-down defined. You see what I mean? Now, you allow for more openness, and at the same time, of course, private also has taken a bigger role, and VC has developed. So it's very interesting to see the articulation between VC and DARPA. And I think you can have a good complementarity between VC funding, and that's what the Draghi report proposes. They said we should have the DARPA, but we should also develop a financial ecosystem with more VCs and more institutional investors. And I think now we are going towards more complementarity.
So what I see coming from this side of the Atlantic is that we don't lack talent. I was reading a statistics, that 40% of the American unicorn actually are European. So my question for you is, what is missing in Europe? So we always hear fiscal space.
You're absolutely right. The drama is that if you look at breakthrough innovation, again, work by my friend Bergeau and other co-authors, if you look at breakthrough innovations worldwide, they cite a lot European papers, despite the fact our research is globally underfunded. They cite much more, European papers than China or other parts. You see what I mean?
And the little moment of pride, the top one in Europe is the UK. The top one in Europe is the UK.
Is the UK. UK is particularly good. Absolutely. No, I know. That's why we don't want the UK with us. Absolutely. We won't let you go, guys. No. So you see, the research that leads to breakthrough innovation is to a large extent done in Europe. But it does not translate in breakthrough innovation done in Europe, except the exception of the LabEx, where you had some breakthrough around the LabEx. So what you need, and then you get into the Draghi report. It's all Italian-driven, Draghi, Letta, and the Bocconi. It's all the good ideas come from Italy. You need a single market. We don't have a true single market in Europe. It's not only because you exited, you did Brexit, because even among us, we have what we call the gold plating practice. Each country adds its own regulations on top of the European regulation. So we don't have a true single market for goods and services in Europe. And that means that you don't have enough grants for an innovator. You see, whereas China is big market and US is big market. And also it means you don't have enough competition. But competition is important. If you want to have lots of newcomers or you want to do breakthrough innovation to escape competition, competition is a big driving force of breakthrough innovation. And because you have a segmented market that also, stalls, it hinders competition. So we first need a good single market to have bigger rents for innovators and bigger punishment for those who don't innovate, which is competition. Okay, so that you need, number one. Second, the financial ecosystem. We don't have enough venture capital because you need, the whole thing is to say, I need people to be able to fail. So for research, is the long-term research funding. For the startups, is venture capital. You say, the venture capitalist, is a good venture capitalist, tells you, no big deal if you fail in the short run. I'm here with you, okay? And then if you want to have more risk-taking by managers of larger firms, I've done work with Van Reenen and Zingales showing that institutional investors, pension fund, mutual fund, play a big role in also, encouraging risk-taking and disruptive innovation in larger firms. We don't have any of that in Europe. Voilà. And in the US, there is much more. And the DARPA. You see, so those are the various policies that we need to have in Europe. But you see, in Europe, we have very fantastic research. We have freedom and democracy, more than everywhere else. If you take Canada, of course, with us, we have, a social model can be improved a lot. We are not all like Denmark, but we are much better than the US on the social model. And we have a concern for the environment, which is much bigger than in the US and in China. So I think on those, we have soft power, the high quality research, the culture we have, the attachment to these values make us a very attractive part of the world for anybody who wants to innovate. You see, for example, Jan LeCun, the great news in Davos, we had very bad news. We got sort of slapped in the face by all the US administration. But the good news is that Jan LeCun, who is a kind of pillar of the AI revolution, left Meta and is setting up a new firm in France, UK, and again, France, UK. And he wants to go beyond LLM. He will do maybe the next revolution within AI. And in Europe, why? Because he thinks Europe is nice. It's a nice place to be. So we have to harness this soft power and be as attractive and invest, and attract those guys who want to innovate.
So most of the policy discussion in Europe is about fiscal space. And we have been told for many years that after the global financial crisis, there was no taxpayer money to be using again. And then we got COVID, and then actually we found that the government could intervene again with COVID. Yeah. And now we said, oh, this is the last time. Yeah. And then there is the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Yeah. And all of a sudden, we are thinking to make huge increase in defense spending. Yeah. So, because and when we go historically to the US, defense spending is the one that brought us nuclear energy, is what they brought us GPS.
DARPA.
And then all the DARPA. Yeah. So my question for you is, could be those large increase in defense spending an opportunity to fill that gap with the United States?
It's true that Europe usually acts when it feels emergency. So with COVID, there was an emergency. Putin, combined with Trump, is perceived as an emergency. So my hope is that Davos will be a wake-up call. I saw European leaders rushing into that big room where Trump was, speaking, to be slapped in the face by Trump. Said, you are all very bad. Partly he's right, we are lagging behind, He was not entirely wrong. He said it in a very blunt way. And they just got there to be spanked, you see what I mean? So I hope this is a wake-up call for Europeans to start doing, recovering. That's my hope.
Now the discussion seems a lot too dominated. We put this also in the title of our talk of guns versus butter. This idea that every pound that you spend on guns is taken out from education, is taken out from other services.
The thing is that I think Draghi again did a very interesting Martin Feldstein lecture that you saw, you remember, 5 years ago, and he was prior to the report, of course, and he was still Prime Minister of Italy. And I think, his point was to say, well, the contract should be that European countries should show seriousness is how they manage public finance, which is always difficult to say for a French, of course, because the credibility with a French accent, it doesn't go too well, down too well. And at least now we have a budget for the past 3 days or 4 days, so which is a huge achievement. So I praise my Prime Minister for having managed to get a budget off the ground. And the idea is that if member states show seriousness, then collectively, Europeans could borrow. Could do what we did during COVID. And that, I think, is a serious contract. We show seriousness individually in how we manage, recurrent spending, pension system, whatever. And in exchange, we have the possibility to borrow, to invest, because borrowing is an investment in future growth. And that's what I think we'll do. So I think we will be able to invest in a defense, DARPA, where I would include AI, but I think on energy, we are very good on nuclear energy. and on other things. And I hope that that will be the way to do it, and is to have this kind of implicit contract, seriousness of member states in managing public finance, where in an exchange we borrow. But I think the opportunity is that now you have a Germany that wants to invest in defense, including, and infrastructure. They realize in Germany they have a falling infrastructure. So they need to rebuild their infrastructure, and they need to invest in defense. And the UK wants to come back and do things with France and other countries. So I think, and Canada also wants to do things with I think we should take any opportunity now to rebuild together. And I think that those are the things. And my feeling is that the Draghi report, I don't think it will be done. It will be implemented at EU level, possibly the research part. But even there, just with to maintaining ERC, it was already a huge achievement. My feeling, I believe in the coalition of the willing. I believe that it will be those countries that want to do things together, UK, France, Germany, possibly Sweden or others, and then it should be those who want. We should align on the max, not on the mean. And it should be coalition of the willing.
So let me play devil's advocate. Don't you fear that with all this large increase in defense spending and not so many opportunity of financial market not sufficiently developed, in the end we are going to end up giving official in the Ministry of Defense with the large check, they have no clue what to do. They are going to go, and let me go back to your initial point, to the usual incumbent that are going to offer slight update of what they already offer at a much higher price because demand will increase, generate inflation, and we are going to get neither security nor technological leadership because all this technology will be outdated as a matter of months.
So I think a very important point here is that if you look at the frontier innovators nowadays, it's the US and China, okay? A common point between the two is that they managed to reconcile competition policy and industrial policy. So I mentioned the DARPA in the US, but you see, very interestingly, China is doing, of course, very aggressive industrial policy. But to some extent, they have competition because they do yardstick competition. You see, for example, they often help several firms competing firms, and then they can do yardstick competition between firms or between regions. And it's not great, but it's at least they managed to, in Europe, in the name of competition policy, we precluded any form of sectoral state aid. It was a bad word. Sectoral state aid in Europe, until very recently, was forbidden. You had to do it to hide it, you see, because there was this view that that competition policy has to exclude any form of industrial policy. There was very much the Kruger view. You see, I mean, of course, they had in mind the old way of doing industrial policy, where you pick winners, and in that respect, they were right. But they never thought that you could have well-governed, properly governed industrial policy that would be competition-friendly. And that's the problem, is that the doctrine in Europe, the economic doctrine, for example, Maastricht, we say no more than deficit, not more than 3% of GDP. We put all spendings on the same footing, current spending, pension system, whatever, and investment in growth and the environment. We should not put all spending on the same footing, okay? In the name of competition policy, we precluded any form of industrial policy. That's why we're lagging behind so much. And the budget, the EU budget, is very small. We are, as a friend of mine says, we are a regulatory giant and a budgetary dwarf. And that's where Draghi comes about and says, you need to have this contract. We show seriousness, but you need to borrow. I think that's we have the economic doctrine was very Hayekian. I don't have anything against Hayek, but the view was that member states should be completely, it should be essentially law and order and market, and you should really, prevent member states from doing anything. Don't spend much, don't do industrial policy, don't do this, don't do that. It was very much, a set of rules not to do things. And that has to evolve, because so otherwise we won't be able to, we have, if you look at the top innovations, you see US top, you see China now emerging very strongly, and Europe declining very strong. This has to be reversed. So the doctrine has to evolve as well, the one I was mentioning.
So let's go across what are the exemptions in Europe. The EU very recently approved an exemption of the budget for defense. If you spend for defense, you don't have to respect the rule. In Germany, now you can do that also if it's investment. And here in the UK, it doesn't count in the fiscal rule, so you
good.
exempted the Chancellor rule if you do capital spending, which means investment in R&D. Which one is right? I feel that the EU, and I will be very blunt about this, exempting the entire defense spending, just to put things in perspective, 60% of defense spending is personnel, 30% is equipment, less than 10% is defense R&D.
So I think it's important to avoid bureaucracy, and I think you're right. I mean, you should be very careful to avoid bureaucracy, and I think you're very right to favor newcomers. I think a industrial policy should be competition-friendly and entry-friendly, because otherwise the problem is that if you help incumbents, you reduce the probability of entry of newcomers. So you don't want, and that's what the Schumpeterian framework, tells you, that other growth models that do not tell you. If you help incumbents only, you raise entry costs. And that's exactly what you don't want to do, because you want to favor new entry. So it should be competition-driven, biased and entry biased. And you should favor entry. And I would put AI into defense. For example, there are lots of newcomers in AI. That should be included in the defense DARPA. But that's why I want the DARPA model, and I think it should go all through DARPA. So I think if Germany wants to spend defense, or France, or whatever, they should create DARPAs and make them the John von Reenen rules. The one he describes, the one I described with the new open topics, to favor and at the same time develop venture capital at the same time. So you should have very open way of managing DARPA, the one that I described, and together with developing the financial ecosystem, because then you will favor entry. Because co-investment between private and public also makes sure that when a project is bad, the private side leaves, and then you don't continue a bad project. Because the problem so often is that you start bad project and you don't know how to interrupt them. The co-financing with public-private is crucial there to make sure that bad projects are not continued.
Absolutely. So my reading of the literature itself is that what really differ across the pond is the ability to crowd in private investment.
Exactly.
So let me tell you the specific case of the UK. So I would slightly disagree with you with the emphasis on the D of DARPA, where the D stands for defense. I like much more what you said now, that actually AI
should
climate change should all be part of DARPA.
Absolutely.
But let me tell you the experience of the UK. We have a high reward, high risk institution for innovation. It's called ARIA. However, it only invests about 200 million a year. DARPA is 4 billion a year. Also, the British Business Bank has very successful funded a lot of early stage startup. However, where this country, which has the best, I dare to say, university of the continent, the best innovation, the best startup, this country, as much as the rest of the continent, failed to keep late stage startup, which then always fly where market.
Exactly what happened with Pfizer.
So which kind of policy the government
that was the problem.
Should the government be a venture capitalist as in China? Because China is doing a lot of this late-stage innovation, late-stage startup.
So that's the thing. I spent 20 years in the US, and I saw Consul de France, the consulate, I got the whole sequence of consul visit Boston. And they would tell me, what my main job is to host startups from France that cannot grow in France, and they come here because they get the venture capital. So that's where we are in bad need to develop the financial ecosystem. In China, they can grow them a lot through other ways. They don't have a very developed, financial ecosystem in China, but they have government support and have other ways to have them grow. They have a market. First, China, the firms have a market, so they grow only to the fact that they have a big market.
So, Philippe, I could continue here for another couple of hours, and I fear that you will continue even for more. Your endurance is spectacular and impressive, so I will not dare that race. But I know there has been a lot of questions. This is one of the occasions in which I received questions from the audience already before the event. So before asking for people to contribute and have the chances to offer you, I just would like to, one line, if it was one piece of advice that you could give to the EU to von der Leyen, or you could give to the Chancellor here in the UK, if it was one framework, one strategy for public policy for innovation, which is our serious, which is what is close to my heart when I advise the UK government, the EU government, the German government, what do you think will be that framework, that strategic new idea that they don't have on the radar, but they should?
I would say Draghi. I mean, if I had one word to say, try to follow the Draghi, but I would add to Draghi the flex security, the inclusiveness. We have a big problem so Draghi is the single, all the things I described, okay? So in one word, implement the Draghi agenda. But I would say one thing to be added, that is not in the Draghi report so far, is the flex security, the inclusiveness. I mentioned education and flex security. And you know what the problem is if you don't have inclusiveness? Those who feel excluded, they say, I will try the populists. Because that's the one thing I have not tried yet. I was hoping Tory will work for me, doesn't work. I tried Labour, well, I like the Labour government, but some people may feel that the Labour is not delivering what they want. And they say, well, let's try what we have not yet tried. And that's extremely dangerous. We have that, that people, thinking this way in the UK and in France. We both have, populists on the doorsteps of power. And I think it's very important to know that the agenda, the pro-innovation agenda, be inclusive. So school, people want to feel that, no matter the social background, their children can go to school and raise and fulfill their ambitions, no matter the social background. I think that's very important. Very important to know that no matter where you live, you can get good health care if you get sick, you see. And if you lose your job, you are not left out. You will bounce back into the labor market and you'll be prepared. Particularly if you have a good education system, flex security works well on top of it. And that works. We know in Denmark they do it, so they could do it elsewhere. But I think it's very important to do that, because if you don't do it, then the risk, and sometimes, for example, I know even the Labour government in the UK, they took some steps on cutting on social spending. Wait a second. And I think it was very bad. And then they backed down. And it was a very bad idea, because if you get the populists, for the economy, the cost will be much higher than the little saving that you made by cutting the social. So you have, and that's what we did in France, we had to stop the pension reform. We had the pension reform, the way it was done was unacceptable to the French population. We decided to stop the clock. There were various people who said, but no, it will cost this and that. But they didn't look at the counterfactual. The counterfactual is that the government would fall and that the populists would really take over. Or you would have no government for the next 6 months with a spread, interest rate spread, really skyrocketing. The cost would have been enormous, or the populists taking over. And I think when we decide now whether we want to take a social, reform or remove a social spending, we should reason in terms of opportunity cost. What will happen if we do it? What will be the alternative? And what is the cost of the alternative? And when I defended that in France, you should stop the clock for the pension reform, is I say, if you don't do that, the cost of the alternative will be extremely high. And as soon as it was done, the stopping, the spread went down again. And I think it's very important when we do political economy. I think it's very important. And you want growth to be inclusive. If you don't have inclusive growth, I tell you, it's unsustainable. People will go to populists and they will derail. There's no Draghi. If you are populist in UK and France, the Draghi report is dead. There is no Draghi report. We are finished. So I think it's very important to be aware of that thing. And that's maybe Macron, for example, was very much pro. He did very good reforms that we pushed on labor market reforms, on professional training, on fiscal tax reforms and things. All that was very good. But what he did not take into account is the social movement. He didn't dialogue with the unions, take that into account. And I think that's how he screwed up his second term in big part. And that's why we have the danger of the population. So we have to be very careful. That's one lesson from France. I don't know the details in the UK, but we have to be very careful. We need innovation-based growth, but we need it to be inclusive. And in fact, when you have good education, good competition policy, and good flex security, you get at the same time more innovation and more inclusive growth at the same time.
Is not the American model the one with the lowest social mobility,
you get
the highest innovation?
You get, but you saw the outcome. You have now. Yeah. Here you are.
What I've learned today is that it's not a simple cherry pick on the spectrum between socialism and no growth.
No, you can have policies that make you...
Actually, you can have both. It's not a trade-off.
You can have policies that make you more innovative and more inclusive. Competition. When you have competition policy, you mean new entry, more creative destruction. That means more social mobility. Competition is innovation enhancing and also social mobility enhancing. Education, of course, the lost Einsteins I was mentioning, and the flex security. Here are three important policies, and those are the ones you will need for AI to succeed. AI has a big growth potential and has big potential to create jobs. But to harness this potential, you need competition. Otherwise, you have a few firms, dominating AI and preventing entry of new innovators. You need education and flex security to make sure that, there will be job destruction and job creation, but to smooth out the transition from old jobs to new jobs.
Fantastic. And that, to me, this is the best answer also to why is a fake trade-off, the one between guns and butter, exactly for the same reason that you discussed. So let me now give a chance, Philippe, to take back his energy and maybe having a little bit of water. Also because it's my chance to speak for longer. So please have your glass of water.
I have to tell you a story about, I have to tell you a story before we start. I have to tell a story of failure. When I was a Harvard student, my dream was to get into the Harvard Society of Fellows. It's a first-rate postdoc. And you have dinner with Amartya Sen every week, very good food. I tried the food once because I was not allowed to have the food. And I had to take an oral exam. I failed most of my exams, I failed many exams in my life. And of course, I failed the oral exam. Bob Solo, in fact, was a senior fellow. He told me, you didn't understand the question that was asked, do you? I understood. I had one dinner with him, and that was it for the Society of Fellows. And I failed it, and I ended up at MIT, which is not the worst outcome that can happen to you. And that's how I met Peter Howitt, and we did the model. Imagine the drama if I had been accepted to the Society of Fellows. So failure can be so helpful in your life. Yeah.
Absolutely. Plus, in the end, he won the Nobel Prize.
With the other failures, better.
We say later. So let me open up from the floor whether there are any question. I see a few hands raising. So let me try and come from the gentleman. If someone could help maybe with a microphone, if you could very kindly introduce yourself. While this is happening, let me take Philippe, but you took revenge because the Nobel Prize for Growth of Solo was just for a residual, whereas yours was for creative destruction. So,
but Solo was a great guy. He did not behave as an entrenched incumbent. In fact, he always encouraged us. He's a great guy, actually.
So was he was a wonderful the best example of competition policy.
We were doing his creative destruction, but he was very friendly, very friendly and encouraging. He's a great mensch, as we said.
And everybody
he was a true mensch.
He was a true mentor, a great mentor. So let's go with the first question.
So I was MBA 2009 here, so
yes.
A bit of gray hair. My question is on competition and your point about rents. You don't include the state as an institution or the structure within the competition framework, or you didn't talk about it. The state has incentive to have monopoly rents. The best example is actually in defense you gave, where there are certain defense incumbents in military-industrial complex which are close to the state.
Yeah.
Also, the state extracts rents in the form of tax. And it has, towards the innovator, it wants to extract rent from what they do.
Yeah, yeah.
How do we include the state, and how do we guard against state rent extraction? Against
So exactly. So Schumpeter himself was worried that yesterday's innovators would become incumbents that would prevent not only entry, but would also influence the state not to implement competition policies. In fact, we worked with Sergei on Korea. That's the middle income trap syndrome. Korea grows, South Korea, of course, because the North Korea, the electrocardiogram is flat, of course. No, the South Korea. The South Korea have very high growth rate of per capita GDP after World War II, and the Korean War. And then, growth goes down. Or goes down partly because they catch up, when you are very far below the technological frontier, when you imitate the frontier, you grow much faster than when you're already getting closer. But what happened in Korea is that during the catching up phase, you had the chaebols, the big conglomerates developed. Not only they discouraged non-chaebol firms from entering, but they also put pressure on the Korean government not to implement pro-competition policy, which are key to frontier innovation. And it took the financial crisis of the late 90s to weaken the power of the chaebols, and which allowed not only that boosted entry of non-chaebols, but also made made it possible to have pro-trade and pro-competition policy in Korea. And that's what we worked with Sergei. It's very interesting. But I think my answer is that typically incumbents want to use their rents to put pressure on governments not to let new entrants, the lobbying, the corruption and whatever. And that's where civil society, in the case of Korea, it was the crisis and the pressure from IMF and others. In other places, civil society has a big role to play. And of course, the problem in some countries and now in the US and whatever is that, they try to silence civil society because civil society is there to denounce the collusion between incumbents and the state. And that's where the triangle is important. Wendy Carlin and Sam Bowles talk a lot about the triangle. But you need the firms that innovate, the state that implements competition policy or not, and the civil society that is there to denounce the collusion between, which is media, unions, association, voters, and that's the answer is the triangle, I think. At least is one possible answer. But you need something else, that helps.
Philippe, we have one more question on this side.
Hi, my name is Zafar. I'm a student. I'm taking emerging markets course with Paolo, and I also work for EBRD. So my question is on the emerging markets. We spoke about the US, Europe, how to spur innovation in these developed markets. But what about emerging markets? How to spur innovation there where there are social and financial constraints? Thank you.
I can't, so I encourage you to read the World Development Report on middle income trap, especially because it's all about emerging markets. And so the whole issue is to make it possible to have entry. Growth is mostly a lot driven by imitation, but it's important to have new entry and new and schooling and new. So how you can do so? For example, China grew a lot, through technology transfers. They had a good education level. They could take advantage. The combination between education and openness allowed them to absorb technologies from abroad. And they had a lot of catching up growth. But then now they are into more frontier innovation. But as much as you can favor, a good education system, I think, is crucial. That always. We know that it's a big input. There's been work by my friend Ufo Kaksigit and Marta Prato on Denmark, showing the importance of education as more important than R&D subsidies. If you want to have good imitation and innovation, education is kind of paramount. So good education system, openness, those things are already, the combination of the two can drive you very far. I think I would recommend that very much.
So we have a couple of questions on this side.
My name is Abdul Rahman, MBA 26. My question, so you mentioned scale and markets, and perhaps scale now matters more than ever. I like the way you put it. Basically, innovators need bigger rewards and perhaps maybe bigger punishments for those who don't innovate. My question to you is about smaller markets, smaller countries, perhaps in emerging markets. What could be the narrative that you see in the near future?
I think, Korea is very interesting because they had a very good education level as well. Korea first was producing rice and not doing. And then what they did is that, of course, they developed a high education system because they were invaded by Japan. And of course, when you have been invaded, you think education and human capital is crucial. So it was amazingly helpful for Korea to have a good education system that allowed them to move up the scale. You see what I mean? And that's what they did. And they went after, at least imitating or producing or possibly marginally innovating on, leading technologies at the time. And that's, I think you should emulate this kind of the example of Korea or the Asian country that relied a lot again on education and openness and absorb the technology transfer, management practices. You see there is a lot you can get because also in terms of management practice, that's all the work of Nick Bloom and Van Reenen and on management practice, that those are big sources. Factor reallocation, technology transfers and management practice improvement can get you very far already. But that you need for that, a very solid basic primary, secondary and undergrad education. Oh, the market size, yeah. So, but you export. I mean, so for example, you have small countries that export. And so the market is the export market. So that's the thing. And of course, now that you have, if you have trade barriers, it becomes a problem. Obviously, trade barriers, slow down development of emerging countries. Of course, that's the one big virtue of globalization is that it speeded up. It allowed countries, emerging countries, to get out of poverty and grow. But I think you can still do it. But of course, now you have a more segmented market. But export is the way, I think.
So we were sold out in person, but I think we have so many people also from online.
Yeah.
So I think there was something coming up there from the people that are following online live.
Thank you. My name's Akanjali. I'm one of the student representatives.
I don't see you.
Hello.
Oh, here, okay.
Representing the online audience, and we've had a number of questions.
Yes.
So a great one from Ziu. Her research studies China's government guidance funds and their impact on VC-backed innovation. And in your framework, how do you see China's evolving role in the global innovation ecosystem? And if Europe and China could adopt one institutional feature from one another, Europe from China's guidance funds, China from DARPA-style mission innovation, what should it be?
Yeah. So China has done, China, it's been very interesting. I taught a lecture on China. They did a lot of policies, because first they rebuilt capital stock, then they did, basic industrial policy, but then they went into fostering innovation with vertical programs and also programs, to attract back, to reverse the brain drain of Chinese abroad. And so they had various programs, more or less, some horizontal, some vertical, to encourage research. And they introduced tenure tracks. They didn't have tenure track systems. They introduced tenure track systems. So there is a lot of reforms, a lot of spending. They invest a lot. So for the amount of money they invested, maybe not optimally allocated always. You see what I mean? But the amounts are so huge that, they achieve results. And they have various programs, some of them horizontal, some of them vertical, for, to push innovation-based industrial policy. And I tell you, the thing is also they managed to have this artistic competition to some extent, of course, thanks to the fact they have a large market, which made it, more competition-friendly. On research, it's amazing. They benefited a lot from co-authoring with other countries. I wrote a paper on Chinese research and the effect of the China initiative during the first Trump administration. So Trump, during his first, term in office, tried to restrict collaboration between Chinese researchers and US researchers. That had a damaging effect on Chinese research. Because, in fact, it's true they didn't have freedom in China as we do, but they were catering a lot on freedom elsewhere. And that was a problem. Of course, maybe that's where Europe can try to take advantage of the restrictions. So China is very interesting because they don't have the civil society as we have it. They don't have the freedom the way we have it. But they found a way to circumvent. They did the artistic competition. On the one hand, they send people abroad in places that are where you have freedom and they take advantage of it. It's very interesting how and together with enormous amount of investments to attract also people from abroad. So I was visiting China 2 months ago. It's vibrant. You go to the Beijing universities. They are all after the creative destruction and it's vibrant what they do. So it's very interesting to see what, now the question is, without freedom or whatever, can you do Kuhnian innovations? Can you do paradigmatical innovation? I don't know. There are, on face recognition, electric cars, solar panels, they are at the top. But they improve maybe at the margin on the top, or they do some breakthrough innovation. But will they do the next AI, for example? Will they do the next absolutely paradigmatical? Maybe not, but nor are we doing it so far. So, but they went pretty far with what they do. They probably, a lot of what they spend is not, Zilibotti showed, for example, Fabrizio, that maybe their spending is not optimally allocated. You see, there is misallocation. But because they spend so much, they make up partly from the misallocation. I'm sorry, I've been a bit long in my answer.
No, it's wonderful. We will stay here for hours, but there are many questions that...
let me try to give short answers.
So okay. I was about to say, please keep your questions short,
question was not easy,
because I don't manage to give short, to discipline Philippe to give short answers.
I do short answers.
So please, let's go to the gentleman back.
Hey, Professor.
Short answers to long questions. It's very embarrassing.
Hello, Professor. I was here 20 years ago doing an MBA So my question to you is around innovation and the incentives that are created with respect to welfare. So if we give welfare, we may reduce the incentive to innovate. So my question is, how much welfare is okay? And I would just point out that you skipped a little question here and you said that our governments should not cut welfare because the alternative is a populist government. But the question is, no. Well, that was some of the answer that appeared to be given. So my question is, at what level should welfare be capped at, or should it not be capped, in order to maximise innovation?
Yeah, but I don't, maybe I might have been misunderstood. I'm very Danish. Okay. So Denmark.
Hard to believe, eh?
Voilà. I'm very Danish. I don't know if somebody from Denmark here. But, you don't have a true trade-off. It's not that to become more innovative, you have to renege on inclusiveness and social. I gave you 3 policies that make you more inclusive and more innovative. Education, makes you more inclusive. The flex security system, that's good for welfare, you see what I mean? But it also makes your economy more innovative. So they managed to have social mobility, protection, and innovation. So it's not that, anything that makes you more innovative means that you have a lower welfare, but it's you do welfare in a certain way. You see that the way they do it is to say, it's not that I give you an income to do nothing. I give you unemployment benefits, but you need to look, we help you get a new job. If you refuse more than 2 jobs, the unemployment benefit goes down. And that's the way, I believe in the way to give benefit that induces people to work, except the disabled, of course, should not be, then they cannot obviously get into the system the same way. But you see, what I like in the flex security is the idea that you help people help themselves. You see what I mean? You help them bounce back into the labor market. And there, I think welfare. It's a way to do welfare, but which is job friendly, work friendly and innovation friendly. And so I don't think it's a trade-off. It's a way to organize it. So that's my way of looking. It's not. I don't think that. To become more innovative, you should renege on social. I don't.
So I'm almost.
I know it's long. Yeah.
I have exhausted all my tricks, so let me try last one.
Last one.
Now we go with 2 questions at the same time.
And then,
So first,
and I pick one at random
of your choice. So we have one question there, and then the second question from the gentleman here in row 4. So please go first, and then we go back to
Philippe. I feel super bad taking the floor away from LBS because I'm Cambridge Judge grad.
Yes.
I'm an entrepreneur and an entrepreneurship scholar.
We are inclusive.
The question builds upon one of your final remarks about your advice to the UK government. I wanted to ask, would you tell us a bit more about your criticisms of populism? And do you think any of its merits are being traded off in order to avoid its dangers?
Let me take also the second question. Here was from a long time, so I'm trying to give as much room to everybody, so please, short.
My name is Konstantinos and I'm a student here. My question also relates to the UK, actually, which operates, at least in theory, under a mission-driven framework under the Labour government. So I was wondering if you had any views or criticisms about the missions, at least in theory, as a system.
Yeah. So I will start with the first question. Populism, so for example, the populism, the populists in France, for example, they deny the European decline. They say there is no decline. So some say, the way out of our problems is to clump on the foreigners. Okay, they are the ones, and the left-wing populists. The solution is the Zuckman tax. You put the Zuckman tax, and then you solve all the problems. First, you don't have a European decline, so there is no need for Draghi. Okay, you can put Draghi on the garbage can or in the
a big tax on wealth, on the complete financial.
No, but the Zuckman tax. The thing with the Zuckman tax is not. I am in favor of progressive taxation. I'm a good social democrat. I'm in favor of progressive, and you need tax revenues to finance education, health, flex security. You need tax revenue, but there they tax also unrealized wealth. You see, for example, and they want to tax someone with an AI unicorn, nascent AI unicorn in France. Is Mistral is valued at 12 billion euros, but it gets no cash flow so far. if you had the Zuckman tax, the guy would have, Arthur Manch, would have to borrow to pay a tax on 12 billions, which, now if you have a bursting of the AI bubble tomorrow, the 12 billion may become 3 billion. You see what I mean? And instead of investing in growing his firm, he has to borrow and find, outside shareholders or whatever to just pay tax on an income that he has not generated yet. Then you do that, AI is dead. I mean, France becomes such a cheese country. We have very good cheese, like in the UK, Reblochon, Camembert, but AI leaves France right away, on the spot. Voilà. So it's important. That's the left-wing populists, you see, that they think that, you can put the tax, they of course exaggerate the return from the tax completely, I think the populist is to just say, you go with the mood. You try to please what you think are the public mood. You see what I mean? You don't try to look at, whether it all goes, it all falls together, it all adds up. You see, you don't do serious general equilibrium, and you just cater to the mood of the moment. That's the populism. And I think we need in Europe, and that the problem in Europe was really to deny the problem. For too long, we denied we were in decline. We have to acknowledge we were in decline, and we have to solve the problem. You see, we have to deal with it. I'm not being pessimistic. I'm just saying we need to acknowledge the extent of the technological decline. In Europe, it's clear. It's not only that our productivity growth is half of what it is in the US. It's also, if you look at the most innovating firms in Europe nowadays, they are the same as 25 years ago, not in the US. And in the leading technologies, Europe is falling. We know we are declining. So it's important to acknowledge the decline and say, here are the policies we put in place to deal with it. And the populists are those who deny the problem. You see what I mean? They say what people want to hear. And once they come to power, they do something else. They do things they did not announce in the first place. And they can be very bad things. That's where the populism is.
Philippe, let me collect the final two questions. One here and one there. Yeah. Please, very, very brief.
Trisha Tan, MBA 2011. I am very fascinated by the Draghi report, which you mentioned. And with geopolitics, strategic autonomy is a big topic in the European Union. Yeah. I would love your views on how you think this is going to play out, given the constraints that you discussed earlier, no single market and all of that, and at the same time, theories of comparative advantage. Where do you think the world is heading?
So let's take a final question.
Final question.
Hi,
okay. Final question.
Hi, my name is Shailin. I'm from India, and recently Europe and India signed a great deal, like mother of all deal. How do you see the future of this deal? And do you think we delayed a lot because we've been negotiating this deal from last 20 years?
Of the European Commission?
Yeah.
And so
the free trade deal in India and Europe.
The Europe-India?
Yeah.
Okay, then I reached the Nobelite, you see what I mean? That's what we're talking about. Okay, so let me the first question was about, I forgot, the big topic in Davos this year. I mean, I think under control of Hélène, who was there, who's been a Davos. My first time in Davos, probably last, but I saw AI was a big topic. Another one was the value chains. The big thing now with Trump is that you need to remodel the value chains. Before, we need to have value chains. Cost minimization was the driving principle of the value chain. Now it's resilience. You need to now redesign value chains to make sure that you have that you will not be blackmailed on the way. Okay, that you will not have suppliers blackmailing you, hold up, to minimize the hold up problem. Those who have done contract theory, we call that the hold up problem. And the way now is for people who share common values. Like I took freedom, democracy, like Canada. EU, UK, I don't know if Australia or whoever, we need to think about, to remodel the value chains in a way that makes it possible to trade and to have innovation, you see, because we know we need trade, and trade is good for innovation. Trade means a bigger market. It means more competition. It means more technology transfers through trade, you see what I mean? So we know that trade and trade liberalization is good for innovation. So we need now, despite the fact we have to remodel the value, the supply chain with resilience being the driving principle, we need to maximize innovation globally, subject to this remodeling of the value chain. And that, I think, is a big challenge. And it means also that we need to deal with China. For example, some people say with China, we should just stop. No, Carney is doing deal with China. He's very right. He's trying for 3 years. He says, if I'm not happy, I stop after 3 years. I think we have to have a set of countries sharing the same value we do value chain and then cooperate with whoever, but with, of course, being vigilant. And I think that's the new way. Hélène knows much more than I do on this, but I think that's what was being discussed in Davos very much.
So, Philippe, at the end of great event or a lecture that went particularly well, I have always students that come back and says, where can I read more? How can I learn more?
They will say, we don't want to do more economics. We want to go into...
I think you were quite inspiring. You were quite inspiring, and I must say that I extended invitation to a few sixth formers, so you might shape how people think about economics as subject. But I wanted to share one thing, because the name of Draghi came a long time, numerous time. I want everybody to encourage as a further reading Science, the Endless Frontier by Vannevar Bush. This was a report written in 1945 after President Roosevelt asked his chief scientific advisor on civilian innovation, what have we learned from World War II that we can apply to health, to education, to science. And he came about with 3 principles that now we call the Draghi report. But actually, I like to think as the Bush/Draghi report, because he said the government has to identify the area of societal interest. Then he has to rely on university research institute to push the basic research without the commercial need, bringing in and crowding in private investment. And we need the private sector to turn the new knowledge in new ideas. He didn't talk about flexicurity, so there is still a role for Philippe Aghion.
Venture capital. Did he talk about venture capital and institutional investors?
He mentioned it in an implicit way. It was written in 45, but I really recommend it. It was truly inspiring, which brings me to the really final point of...
We always stand on giant shoulders. You know that Schumpeter himself was, read Marx, Das Kapital, volume 3. And very much, if you've read, I've read, Das Kapital, because I had a Marxist past, of course, like a good French of my generation. And it's very interesting. Marx, the volume 1 gave rise to incomplete contracts and Nobel Prize to Oliver Hart, okay? The exploitation theory. The labor theory of value was scrapped, but when they got out of labor theory of value, it gave volume 2 gave the prize to Leontiev, and volume 3, it should have been Schumpeter, it was us. But you see, you always stand on giant shoulders. That's exactly the approach.
Absolutely. So I couldn't think of a better way to start our series of public policy for innovation. Philippe Aghion without tonight, and then on the 20th of March we will continue our journey talking about taxing ideas with Stephanie Stancheva.
She's very good. She knows how to reconcile taxation and innovation. Very, very good.
And then we have a couple events in which I want to play with my cards close to the chest, because we are trying really to complement and going more on the policy side and the industry side. So watch the space, because we started with a big boom with Philippe, literally, as you can see. And we hope, and actually I'm confident, we will continue on this strong pace. Philippe, thank you very much. It was a great honor for us.